Hello and welcome back to our series Catholic Biblical Apologetics. We are now in part 6, part 6b as a matter of fact. Part 6 is on the communion of saints, that marvelous collectivity of those who are known for their holiness, who have gone before us, who present role models to us of all walks of life. In this part, 6b, I'd like to talk about canonization and the sign and wonder that we call incorruptibles. This may be new to many of you. Let's begin with canonization. We've heard the word before, at least the word canon before. We found in part 2 that the word canon comes from the Greek word kanon. It means a standard or measuring rod, a measuring tape. The custom of canonization began in the early church by popular acclamation. Hence the custom of calling all the apostles saint, which means holy. By popular acclamation we mean saints like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were never canonized, as Saint Joseph was never canonized. The Catholic Church since the 10th century, so we're talking in the 900s, has officially applied the standard of holiness of life to certain individuals who lived exemplary Christian lives and through a lengthy process of prayer and study have declared that the individual is in heaven. A little photo on the right I thought was very clever. There's a martini and a ruler. And that ruler is a canon. It's a measuring rod. It will measure the height of that glass. Now, contrary to the belief of some, the Church does not create saints, and boy, every newspaper reporting a canonization makes the mistake, but simply applies the standard of gospel holiness. There it is. To those God permits the Church to know are in heaven with Him. Now, one principal way for God to affirm the presence of an individual in heaven with Him is through the performance of miracles, through the intercession of that person. I thought you'd like to see the process of not only beatification and canonization, but even beginning with Servant of God and Venerable. And this was issued by Pope John Paul II in September of 1997 through the Holy See Press Office. And this is the canonical procedure for causes for beatification and canonization. So canon norms regarding the procedure to be followed for causes and saints, they tell you where to find it in the Apostolic Constitution Divinis Perfectionis Magister, promulgated by John Paul II. To begin a cause, it's necessary at least 5 years to have passed since the death of a candidate. You may remember both after the death of John Paul II himself and Mother Teresa, there was a clamor, Sanctus subito, let him be made a saint immediately. Well, the Church has experience, the Church understands. And this 5-year period is to allow greater balance and objectivity in evaluating the case and to let the emotions of the moment dissipate. And it also gives them time to collect an awful lot of information. So the bishop of the diocese in which the person whose beatification is being requested died is responsible for beginning the investigation. The promoter group, whoever it is, whether it's a diocese itself or a parish within the diocese, a religious congregation, an association, they ask the bishop through the postulator for the opening of the investigation. The bishop once he declares that there is nulla osta, which means no impediment, no major problem, of the Holy See is obtained, forms a diocesan tribunal for this purpose. Witnesses are called before the tribunal to recount concrete facts on the exercise of Christian virtues considered heroic, that is, the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity, and the cardinal virtues, prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude, and others specific to the particular person's state of life. In addition, all documents regarding the candidate must be gathered. At this point, that individual is entitled to the title Servant of God. I'm using an example from the diocese where I came from, and that is the Diocese of Richmond, Virginia, and the young man, a seminarian, was Frank Perriter. He is now Servant of God, and the diocese prepared this holy card. You can see two sides of it there, using his new title now, Servant of God. He was a seminarian. There were his dates. And then on the other side is a prayer. Loving Father, your servant, Frank Perriter, etc. And notice it has an imprimatur of Bishop Sullivan, who was Bishop of Richmond in 2002. And also there is someone called a postulator, one who moves the cause along. In this case, it's Father Scott Duarte. So he has an address. It came a point, by the way, in the process of a beatification that Father Duarte had to move to Rome. The postulator needs to be close to the Vatican. The fourth step is once the diocesan investigation is finished, the acts and documentation are passed on to Rome to the Congregation for the Causes of Saints. Now, the public copy used to further work is put together here. The postulator, resident in Rome by this time, follows the preparation of the summary of the documentation that proves the heroic exercise of virtue under the direction of a relator of the congregation. So they work with somebody in the congregation. The positio, or position, that would be the whole set, the whole document, undergoes an examination, a theological examination, by 9 theologians who give their vote. So that's a major step. If the majority of the theologians are in favor, the cause is passed on for the examination by cardinals and bishops, who are members of the Congregation of Causes of Saints. They hold meetings twice a month. In their judgment, if their judgment is favorable, the prefect of the congregation presents the results of the entire course of the cause to our Holy Father, who gives his approval and authorizes the congregation to draft the relative decree. There's a public reading and promulgation of the decree that follows. For the beatification of a confessor, to be saint, male or female, a miracle attributed to the servant of God, verified after his or her death, is necessary. The required miracle must be proven through the appropriate canonical investigation, following a procedure analogous to that for the heroic virtues, which we mentioned a little earlier. This one, too, is concluded with a relative decree. Once the 2 decrees are promulgated regarding the heroic virtues and the miracle, the Holy Father again decides on beatification, which is the concession of public honor limited to a particular sphere, like that diocese or a continent or something. With beatification, the candidate receives the title of blessed. Now, 2 in our relative lifetimes who are presently blessed is Blessed Pope John the 23rd and Blessed Mother Teresa. We're familiar with them. Before we go any further, let's talk about miracles. A lot of people have crazy notions about what is a miracle. There are televangelists who accept anything, the word of a person calling in, the word of a friend, as a miracle and make great rejoice over it. That's not what the church does, and it's probably not a real miracle. It certainly isn't the miracle as defined in the Bible. Now, in the Bible, there are 3 Greek words that are used for the word miracle. The first is semeion, which means a sign. It's used 78 times. I would say it's a pretty important word. Jesus speaks of his resurrection as a sign. Look at Matthew chapter 12. He said to them in reply, an evil and unfaithful generation seeks a sign, semeion, but no sign will be given it except the sign of Jonah the prophet. So semeion was an event with divine significance. Now, the second Greek word is teras. It is translated a wonder. It's used 16 times. It's also used in combination with semeion. All right? John chapter 4, Jesus said to him, unless your people see signs, there it is, teras, and wonders, you will not believe. So teras means something very unusual, out of the ordinary, amazing, or astonishing. The next word is interesting. In the Greek, it's dunamis. If you think you hear the word dynamite in there, you are correct, because the word dynamite comes from dunamis, and it's translated a power. You can see why. All right. It is sometimes used of ordinary power, but is often translated miracle. It is often used in combination with semeion and teras. Dunamis emphasizes the source of the event. So now we can define a miracle by biblical standards. So it can be drawn from a systematic study of the aforementioned words. So by definition, a biblical definition, a miracle is an unusual event, using the word wonder, that conveys and confirms an unusual divine message. There's the word sign, by means of unusual power. And the word power is used there. A miracle is called supernatural beyond the natural because the effect is beyond the productive power of nature and implies supernatural agency. I think the best spokesperson for the definition of a good miracle is Thomas Aquinas. He teaches that those effects are rightly to be termed miracles which are wrought by divine power apart from the order usually observed in nature, and that's from his work Contra Gentiles. In Sacra Theologica he wrote, and they are apart from the natural order because they are beyond the order of laws of the whole created nature. In ordinary language, that which is beyond the present knowledge and power of the medical and physical sciences. Continue with our list of steps and requirement for canonization. Number 6. For canonization, by the way, another miracle is needed, attributed to the intercession of the blessed and having occurred after his or her beatification. For instance, I was just reading recently that once Pope John Paul II was beatified, the many miracles he had before that cannot be considered. We await on another one, and believe me, I read that we have one being investigated. The methods for ascertainment of the affirmed miracle are the same as those followed for beatification. So canonization is understood as the process of, or the concession, of public worship in the universal church. With canonization, pontifical infallibility is involved. The Holy Father uses his charism of infallibility. With canonization, then the blessed acquires the title of saint, and one in our own times who has completed this process is Saint Padre Pio. Let's talk about images and relics of the saints. These seem to get in the way of others when they look at the way we Catholics operate in terms of our love for our saints. But we happen to operate from what we call an incarnational principle, as the second person of the Blessed Trinity took on flesh, incarnate, enfleshment. We see that important for us in all aspects of our spiritual lives. So we make use of statues, of images, medals, relics, and other objects to call to mind our particular relationship with the communion of saints of the past. These religious objects are used to simply recall to mind the example of a particular saint and to remind us of their nearness to God and their power to intercede for us on earth. Let me show you some biblical examples of the use of images and relics. Let's begin with St. Mark's Gospel, the 5th chapter. She, the woman with the hemorrhage, had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. He didn't touch his flesh, his body. She said, if I but touch his clothes, I shall be cured. Immediately, her flow of blood dried up. Look at Acts 15. Thus they even carried the sick out into the streets, laid them on cots and mats, so that when Peter came by, at least his shadow might fall on one or another of them. Beautiful sign of devotion. Again in Acts, so extraordinary were the mighty deeds God accomplished at the hands of Paul that when face cloths or aprons that touched his skin were applied to the sick, their diseases left them and the evil spirits came out of them. So I think the Bible justifies our use of relics and images. I have an example of some of them, mostly relating to the saints. And the first isn't the Shroud of Turin. That is an image, a negative image of Jesus on the shroud in which he was buried. That's a relic. And next to that is a beautiful reliquary. Reliquary is an instrument or an object which protects and keeps the particular relic. This is the reliquary of the crown of thorns in Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. This third one is a reliquary. It's just what you think it is. It is the hand of St. Stephen the Great, a reliquary, incorruptible, by the way. This other picture, those are small reliquaries. Some of these would be very small, smaller than your hand. But these are relics of the saints. That's just, if you petitioned the Vatican for a relic of a particular saint, that's what you would receive. And last but not least, a rather larger one, but it's a reliquary, and I assume that object in the middle is a relic of St. Ignatius of Loyola, because that's his statue next to it. What about praying to the saints, praying for the dead? We're criticized often by other Christians for this practice. Oh, gosh, Christians from the earliest centuries of the church have expressed their communion, their union with those who have died by praying of the dead. Remember that There is one communion of saints. Inscriptions in the Roman catacombs indicate that the early Christians honored and prayed for their deceased relatives and friends. I have another series that's already available online, and it's called The History of the Mass, and there's a unit on the Mass of the Catacombs. If you want to access that, and you can see some of the artwork in the catacombs expressing how the early Christians honored and prayed for their deceased relatives and friends. Tertullian, about 211, wrote that Christians offered prayer and the Eucharist for the deceased on the anniversaries of their death. We know they practiced these things. The great St. Augustine, he said, neither are the souls of the pious dead separated from the church, which even now is the kingdom of Christ. Otherwise, there would be no remembrance of them at the altar of God in the communication of the body of Christ. So it's not uncommon that non-believers see the Catholic devotion to the saints and dead in general as falling under the prohibition of necrology, which would be the worship of the dead. And necrology is found condemned in the Hebrew scriptures in the Old Testament. These people are not aware of the new life of the Christian, nor are they aware of the New Testament. We have been called out of this life, and those who have been called out of this life are neither dead nor alive. Look at Romans chapter 6. Paul writes, are you aware that we who were baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? We were indeed buried with him through baptism unto death, so that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, we too might live in newness of life. The whole command of Jesus to use water was a symbol of being buried. And the early Christians really did that quite graphically by the person being baptized actually went under the surface of the water and then came out on the other side, all symbols of dying and rising. In his letter to the people of Colossae, Paul also writes, you were buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith, in the power of God who raised him from the dead. So the early Christians, in praying for their dead, were expressing their belief that departed brothers and sisters underwent a purification after death, purgatory, to be purged of remaining sins. Their prayers were prayers that God would have mercy on them during this time of healing and purification. Now, many people who do not share the Catholic Christian faith life have difficulty with the appearance that in their prayers, Catholics appear to pray to the saints, to Mary, as one prays to God. This praying to appears to them to indicate a worship of the saint, as if giving to the saint or Mary what is due to God alone. Nothing could be further from the truth. Earliest Christianity has always defined prayer as conversation, as in conversation with God. Conversation as any other act of communication, like talking or conversing or yelling, requires a sign of the direction of the communication. One talks to someone. One communicates with someone. One prays to someone, converses with someone, yells at someone. But praying to God, as saying to the Virgin Mary, indicates simply the direction of prayer communication. It is more a matter of grammar and understanding communication than acknowledging the worship of the receiver. You will not find the act of, or the prayers or worship to Mary and the saints in the Catholic Church. From the earliest of church councils, including the Council of Rome in 993 and defined later by the Council of Trent, the distinction was made between worship and honor. Catholics believe that worship is due to God alone. We say that up front. Catholics honor those saints who have gone before us as a sign of faith and victory in living the Christian life. I'd like to take a moment here while we're in this section to talk about signs and wonders. God promised signs and wonders from the earliest times in the Pentateuch. It continued throughout the Old Testament. God affirmed his action and his being behind, affirming the teaching by signs and wonders. Jesus did that. He was asked right up to Calvary to perform another sign and wonder, and he knew he had given them all they're going to get. And it continues in the church. In the Apostolic Church and the church today, God has given signs and wonders to affirm what we teach and what we practice. And I'd like to talk about the incorruptibles as the beauty of signs and wonders today. Now, this is not the reason we believe. It would be wrong for someone to actually become a Catholic because of the Incorruptibles. But it is an affirmation of our faith. Let's begin. This is Saint Bernadette Soubirous. You may know her, may not know her. She is the young girl to whom the Mary appeared and lured France and called herself the Immaculate Conception. She is the Saint of Lourdes. And before Lourdes was even approved as a place of worship, she retired to a convent in Nevers, France, and she was born. She was born in January 7th, 1844, but she died on April 15th, 1879. So she was not too old. This is what it looks like today. A partial glass coffin. There is no vacuum. That body gets dirty and has to be washed. The clothes deteriorate and have to be changed. And when they work with this body, by the way, there is always the odor of roses. Here's a close-up. And here's another. Imagine this. Look at this. This is not embalmed. Remember, embalming isn't meant forever. Most undertakers say 3 days is a max to keep a body embalmed. And this is certainly not mummification. You've seen the mummification of the Egyptians. They were very good at mummification. This is not mummification. This is an act of God. This is a sign and wonder of Mary's presence, certainly, and God's affirming message at Lourdes. Here is another, St. Catherine Labouré. St. Catherine Zoe was her christening name. She was born in May 2nd, 1806, died on December 31st, 1876, was canonized on July 27th, 1947. Many of you know her, if not the fact that she's incorrupt, but because it was to her that Mary gave the design for the miraculous medal that many, many, many Catholics wear. There she is, under the altar in the convent where she served as a nun. Here is St. John Vianney, known as the curé or the pastor of Ars near Lyon, France. Born on May 8th, 1786, died August 4th, 1859. There he is, incorrupt. Here is Sister Teresa Margaret of the Most Sacred Heart of Jesus. She died on the 7th of March in 1770, incorrupt. Here is St. Catherine of Siena. She died on March 9th, 1463. She was buried without a coffin. Her body was exhumed 18 days later because of cures attributed to her, and also because of the sweet scent coming from her grave. Her body was found to be incorrupt and remains so today. And she's seated, just as you see the picture on the right. Look at the detail of her hands. St. Francis Xavier was born on April 7, 1506, died on the island of Sanshion near the coast of China, December 3, 1552. Indeed, he's incorrupt. Here is another. St. Louise de Marillac was born in France, August 12, 1591. She founded the Daughters of Charity, a new form of religious life. She died March 15, 1660. She was canonized in 1934. There's her incorrupt body. By the way, her body, as well as St. Catherine Labouré, are in the same chapel, same convent. St. Louise de Marillac is on the left. St. Catherine Labouré is on the right. This one in our own day, this is Blessed John the 23rd. He was born in 1881, became Pope October 28th, 1958. He died on June 3rd, 1963. He is beatified September 3rd, 2000. As is the custom of the Church, they exhume the body to make sure that who is said to be in the particular tomb is that person in that tomb, and when they exhumed him, his body was better looking than when he was laid out before burial. This is Blessed John the 23rd. He's being processed around St. Peter's Square. This is the end of Saints, the Canonization and Incorruptibles, Part 6b. Go now to the next part, Part 7, and we'll talk about Mary, Mother of Jesus and Saint.